Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, April 23rd, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Pennsylvania and the Senate election that is coming up this November and the Democratic primary that far too many of you guys have been telling me that I am completely off about in my expectation that Conor Lamb is going to win. Now, I first want to clarify something. I do think that John Fetterman is going to win this Democratic primary. For a brief period of time, I think I was confused about the data that I had seen. I wasn't trying to intentionally neglect the data that was there. I very much see that John Fetterman has remained the front runner this entire time. I think that I was just looking at it from a different point of view, taking in a bit too much of those endorsements to heart, looking at it and saying, the Philadelphia Democratic Party is on Conor Lamb's side. He has a bunch of representatives endorsing him, a bunch of statewide officials, but that isn't everything, right? And these numbers have clearly shown us that. Now, the most recent two polls from Franklin and Marshall and The Hill and Emerson College show that John Fetterman maintains a lead of 24 points. I am quite interested to see this lead. I think it's something that has been fascinating to me over the past couple of months now, seeing that John Fetterman has maintained a lead. It makes sense. He's the lieutenant governor across the state, but he didn't exactly win by a deafening margin back in 2018. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth just to see a bit more and understand a bit more about how the governorship actually worked, how Conor Lamb is practically, in this point where he's now in second place and always has been, despite him being, I would say, arguably an electable person that the Democratic Party could run. Not to at all insinuate that I think John Fetterman is unelectable, just saying that Conor Lamb individually I think is electable, and I do think that's the same about Malcolm Kenyatta and also John Fetterman. But let's go ahead and continue. So the most recent polls from Pennsylvania show that John Fetterman maintains a lead of 24 points. But on the Republican side, Dr. Oz, who was just endorsed by President Trump, only maintains a lead of about 1 percentage point. Now, this is also where it gets interesting. The Republicans have not made up their minds, but the Democrats seemingly have. I wonder if the Democratic primary, and that's what this video is mostly about, I wonder if the Democratic primary is going to end up more competitive. I think while John Fetterman maintains this lead, Conor Lamb, I think, is still a strong candidate. I'm not trying, again, to defy or trying to change the narrative. I'm more so looking at this from an objective point of view, saying, John Fetterman is in this position, but these endorsements really just don't add up. And I'll show you what I mean by that. This chunk and block on your screen are endorsements that Conor Lamb has received. Bob Brady, former U.S. representative from the 1st Congressional District, the chair of the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania. Matt Cartwright, the 8th Congressional District Representative who is running for re-election, co-chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Mike Doyle, U.S. Representative for Pennsylvania's 18th Congressional District, served in the 14th District as well. What you're finding is that a lot of these names here, Pennsylvania U.S. reps. In addition to that, amongst the state legislative office, what you find is a significant amount. Look at how many Pennsylvania state reps have endorsed Conor Lamb. Look at the labor unions. Look at who has endorsed Conor Lamb. Look at the organizations, National Organization for Women, the Philadelphia Democratic Party, the Stonewall Democrats. I think that's PGH, probably something around Philadelphia, votevets.org. The names here are recognizable. You have people who are more local, more, centralized office, and they're endorsing Conor Lamb. So when I scroll up and I take a look at the endorsements that I see here for John Fetterman, what I find is that there is, a co-founder here for Data for Progress. Also, you have organizations, March On, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and labor unions, which labor unions, I'm sure, are a very big endorsement in the state of Pennsylvania. But when you see just the sheer propensity of these endorsements for Conor Lamb, including sitting U.S. reps who are known across their districts, and that's what's happening. It is just interesting to see. I think it really doesn't make sense to me, but I'm not one to try to fight against numbers. I've done it before and I've lost almost every single time. So at this point in time, it makes sense that John Fetterman is very much the front runner. Now, I did want to do a little bit of, history going back into his actual rise to this nomination. He announced that he was going to be running before he ran in 2016 and lost the Democratic primary here. At that point, he was the mayor of Braddock. He was running against Katie McGinty and Joe Sestak. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Joe Sestak actually ran back in 2010, lost. It was a winnable race, I would argue, looking at the competitive nature of the 2010 Senate race. As much as we would like to believe that 2010 and believe truly that it was a red wave, Pennsylvania was still close, right? As much as we know that 2010 was a year that the Republican Party decimated the Democratic Party nationwide, Pennsylvania only went to Pat Toomey by about 2 percentage points. Joe Sestak ran against Arlen Specter, who was the Republican senator there who had won by deafening margins years prior, and convinced by Democrats to switch to the Democratic Party, ended up a Democrat, obviously. And now we are in this position where we have Joe Sestak, who defeated him for the nomination, and Pat Toomey ended up beating him by 2 points. Now, he came back in 2016. Katie McGinty was former chief of staff and then former to Governor Tom Wolf, very popular governor, and former secretary to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. It was a competitive primary. See the endorsements here, though. Katie McGinty got the endorsements from Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, a lot of senators, a lot of U.S. reps. And then what happened? No, interesting that Joe Sestak didn't win the nomination. He started off with the most name recognition. You had all of these things. And then by the end of it, what happens? Katie McGinty wins with 43% of the vote. John Fetterman, though, still gets about a 19-20% showing statewide. So doing a little bit more, going back into his bids, in 2018, he ran for lieutenant governor. Now, the way that it works in the state of Pennsylvania is that while, you're running with someone else, you will have a separate primary. You're not chosen, right? So Tom Wolf did not choose him. In fact, he was not the incumbent lieutenant governor. The incumbent lieutenant governor lost the primary. So when you are in the state of Pennsylvania, you're running separately from the top of the ticket. But here's what happened. So John Fetterman got the endorsements from Bernie Sanders, got the endorsement from Pete Buttigieg, got endorsements. Pete Buttigieg wasn't really much of a well-known name back then, but he got some endorsements. And through those endorsements, even though he was opposed by people who had statewide, endorsements, state legislative endorsements, what you found is that the results, John Fetterman got 38% of the vote. So he won in that election, and then, of course, won with Tom Wolf across the state, got about 58% of the vote there. Obviously not necessarily because of John Fetterman, because he wasn't there before, but he definitely is now in a position where he was riding the wave of a very popular governor. So that's where he stands right now. Conor Lamb, if you want to do a little bit of history, I would say Conor Lamb is definitely going to come in second place here based off of what we see right now. He ran for House back in 2018. Now, I want to tell you, before you look at this result, and you're thinking, okay, it's 2018. How did the Democrats only win by 0.4, and why does this make him electable? Well, this previous district was a Trump plus 20 district. Trump plus 20. Now, Rick Saccone only lost by 0.4. He was a bad candidate, not a good campaigner. Conor Lamb was exceptional, and he did exactly what Democrats thought was impossible, and that was flip a House district before the midterms. Not a single person, not John Ossoff, not who is the guy down there, Ralph Parnell, or maybe that's the guy who ended up winning it. Whoever it was, not James Thompson. It wasn't any of them. It was Conor Lamb who won and picked up a House seat for the first time for Democrats this entire 2017-2018 cycle before the midterms, and he did it in a Trump plus 20 district. In addition to that, he went on to 2018 and absolutely obliterated his opponents. In 2018, Conor Lamb won with 56% of the vote against an incumbent Republican. And this Republican had the endorsement of Trump, and it was a pretty competitive district. It ended up being a district that, I don't know if they had the PVI here, but it was very, very close. In 2020, it ended up being a lot closer, but Conor Lamb still held on, despite many other Democrats losing across the entire nation. Now, the interesting thing about this is that also, if you're taking a look at what happened in 2022 in the Senate race that Conor Lamb is now running in, you will find that the Republican frontrunner, who was Sean Parnell, who actually ran against Conor Lamb in 2020 and narrowly lost, dropped out. Donald Trump endorsed him, and then he decided to drop out. So now we're in this position where the Republican primary, it's a lot of fighting. People don't know who's going to win. The margins here are very close. You're seeing Dr. Oz up in one. I think David McCormick up in the other. Back and forth, right? So in the American public, the Pennsylvania citizens can't seem to make up their minds on the Republican side. But on the Democratic side, it's becoming much more evident that this is going to be John Fetterman's race to win or potentially lose. Now, looking at opinion polling data so far, we find that John Fetterman, even though these are Democratic-leaning pollsters. In fact, I think Data for Progress is a Fetterman firm, as it was referred to, shows him ahead by 10. You have another a Democratic-leaning poll that shows John Fetterman winning by 9. We have no nonpartisan polling data, and I think the reason might be the fact that they're waiting until the primary actually occurs. Let's go ahead and see when this primary actually takes place, because at that point, we will have a much better idea of who's going to end up winning. So let's go ahead and see, when is this primary. I'm surprised it doesn't tell us when the primary election is going to occur. Okay, well, we'll get back to that in a moment. But for right now, what we're looking at is the Senate race in the Democratic primary is pretty much spoken for as of right now. But I do think things could change, but probably aren't going to. It doesn't make sense. I think where we are right now, you have about, it says May 17th, maybe 3 weeks for these candidates to sort of break away from where they are right now, potentially go up, potentially go down. I think John Fetterman should be in a pretty comfortable position, but I am quite surprised based off of the endorsements that we see for Conor Lamb, that he is not in a more competitive position. When they both get, to the actual nomination process, I think the Democratic Party should be comfortable with either of them winning the general election, possibly. I think looking at the policies that John Fetterman stands for, I think individually the policies are popular, but I think he might be erring on the too progressive side. I don't think that makes him unelectable. What I do think is that he might push away some voters that otherwise might have voted for Conor Lamb, while also reaching out to voters and potentially turning them out to vote that might not have voted if Conor Lamb was the nominee. So it's kind of a trade-off at this point. Conor Lamb could also offer that, idea that he won in a Trump district. He has the means to do so. He knows what he did before. He knows what appeals to both parties. So why not run him? And if he ends up winning, I think that's also a case as to why he could very well win the general election. So there's a lot of arguments on both sides. I think right now where I stand is that I think both of these candidates would have a good shot at the general election. I'm not so sure about which one had have a better shot than the other. I think they both stand individually strong in their respective areas. Of course, there's always going to be a stronger potential nominee, but that's not something that I've given much thought to. And for right now, I'm just going to say that they're probably about equal. But of course, I could update that in the future. But I'm probably going to hold off until we actually get the Democratic primary. Now, this is a pretty important Democratic primary. It also does set the tone for internal Democratic conflicts. Conor Lamb very much represents the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, the more centrist, more moderate, wing of the Democratic Party. Even though I would argue that Joe Biden is now getting a little bit less moderate, a little bit less centrist than Hillary Clinton might have had she been serving, or if Barack Obama was in office still. He's definitely, pushed the Democratic Party, or at least been pushed with the Democratic Party to the left. But there is obviously a lot of discussion about that. But generally speaking, you view Joe Biden, you see Hillary Clinton, you see Barack Obama as the opposition to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And I think John Fetterman represents said progressive wing. I think Conor Lamb represents the centrist wing, and we will see what happens because it's a pretty important primary. It's one of the most populous states in the country. And what happens here could be a determining factor about what happens in other states, or it could potentially tell us about the influence of progressive or centrist candidates that they might have on the Democratic Party as we move through the future. Because there's a lot of uncertainty here when it comes down to what we see in the future of the Democratic Party, and this might give us a better indication of how Pennsylvania might vote in a contested primary in the future, or whether or not they're willing to back progressives or moderates when it comes down to the inevitable election. But of course, we do have to understand that 2022 is very much a red wave expected year. The House, I think, is a foregone conclusion. The Senate, I think, is a little bit closer, but also the Republicans are ahead and probably going to win back the majority. At any point, you can't really take Pennsylvania if a Democrat loses and say they lost because of the fact that they were progressive, they lost because of the fact they were a centrist. Obviously, there's speculation, and you can think things will have gone differently in different types of scenarios. But generally speaking, 2022 is just not a year conducive to a Democratic victory in Pennsylvania. 2016 can show you exactly why that's true. 2010 can show you exactly why that's true. Though Democrats may come close, close isn't winning. Right? And a Republican who wins by 0.1 versus a Republican who wins by 20 serves for the same amount of time in the U.S. Senate. So that's also something to consider as well. I think at this point in time, we have to look at Pennsylvania as a state that the GOP is going to heavily fight for, regardless of who their nominee is going to be. The Democrats, however, seem to be pretty solidified around John Fetterman statewide, but of course that could change, and I think there's a chance that it might. I don't think it's the likeliest outcome. I think Conor Lamb definitely would have had a shot at the general election. For whatever reason, I thought that he was leading previously, before. Wish I'd looked into it a little bit more. But beyond that, I would say that, for right now, I do agree with what a lot of the numbers are telling us, and I really don't like arguing with numbers, that John Fetterman is very much ahead in the state of Pennsylvania. But I don't think, this is something that can't be surmounted in a last-minute surge if some top names endorse endorse Conor Lamb. I think one and many major endorsements that we've seen absent from many top states with close races is one from Joe Biden, one from Kamala Harris, one from nationwide recognizable figures, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. And while I don't know if they'll have as much of an influence on the Pennsylvania Democratic Party as we might otherwise think, I think there's always a possibility that some type of high-profile endorsement could change the trajectory of a race, because they have changed trajectory of races in the past. I mean, you look at other elections where Donald Trump intervenes, and all of a sudden a primary goes completely in the opposite direction from what we were expecting. Or if another scenario in which, Trump endorses someone and actually tanks them in an actual general election. So definitely just depends on what type of endorsement it is, who's doing it, and when it comes. But given the fact that this primary is practically right around the corner, I'm not super confident that the current state of the Democratic primary in the state of Pennsylvania is going to change too dramatically. There's always a chance. I don't think it's likely. I think John Fetterman right now is definitely the front runner, but we shall see what happens. And I think it will be quite interesting to see when more major firms roll into the state of Pennsylvania after they decide their Democratic primary, giving us a lot more of an understanding of the state of Pennsylvania and where it currently stands amongst the nation. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.